My son didn't tell me he was getting married. I found out only because his wife called a week later, her voice tight with urgency, asking if I had sent the rent money yet. That was the moment I understood. The wedding wasn't the only thing they were hiding. I am a mother who has learned to live quietly, folding my life into small routines and simple comforts after my husband passed. My son, once gentle and open, grew distant over the years, wrapped in a life I rarely touched. His wife, polite but guarded, never seemed to know what to do with me. I accepted the space they kept, believing it was just the shape of growing older. But the day she called about rent, I felt a shift in the air, a coldness, or perhaps a truth waiting to surface, to become for a car. The dress was still hanging on the back of my bedroom door the morning they told me. Light from the window touched its plastic cover, making it shine like something sacred or forgotten. I remember touching the hem with 2 fingers, feeling the coldness of fabric that had never been worn. And in that quiet room, with the floor still holding the night's chill, I realized I had been waiting for a moment that had already passed. For weeks before the wedding that wasn't mine to attend, the house moved around me in a strange rhythm. I kept thinking my son would call, that he'd say, "Mom, the date is set," with that old excitement he used to carry in his voice. But the phone stayed silent on the counter, a small black box that suddenly felt heavy with meaning. He visited once during those weeks. He sat on the edge of the sofa like he had somewhere he needed to be, checking his watch as if time had grown impatient with him. When I asked how the preparations were going, he gave me a soft smile, polite, distant, the kind you offer a stranger who's being kind to you for no reason. "Ket soon," he said. That was all soon. The word drifted through the house long after he left, settling into the corners like dust. Every time I walked past the dress, still wrapped and untouched, I wondered if maybe soon meant something different to him than it did to me. I ironed a shawl, just in case I cleaned my shoes, just in case. I set aside a small envelope with a note I wrote for them, heartfelt, words about love and patience and building a home, just in case. But the days slipped by without shape, without invitation. And I kept telling myself that children grow up, that they build their own circles and sometimes forget the ones that held them before. Still, there's a difference between forgetting and being removed. The call came on a quiet morning. I remember the kettle hadn't whistled yet, though steam was starting to curl at its spout. The sun was barely awake outside my kitchen window. When my phone buzzed, I reached for it with a strange, sudden hope, the kind that hurts before it breaks. My son's wife spoke first. Her voice was bright, almost rehearsed. "Oh, we got married yesterday," she said, like she was announcing the weather, just a small thing, for special people. The words didn't land all at once. They came slowly, like snow falling on a field, soft at first, then cold once they started to settle. I remember leaning against the counter, my fingers pressing into the wood grain. There was a pause I didn't fill, because I couldn't. Then she laughed a little, the kind of laugh people use when they want to move past something uncomfortable. But it was lovely, she added, all very last minute. I heard something in the background, a clatter, a door closing, his voice faint but close. "Hey?" He didn't come to the phone. I steadied my breath. I told her I hoped it was beautiful. I told her I wished them well. My voice came out smooth, almost gentle. It felt strange, how easily kindness can cover a wound still forming. She talked a little longer, though I don't remember what she said. My mind had already slipped away, drifting toward the dress hanging upstairs, toward the small envelope on my desk, toward a place in myself I didn't know how to touch without breaking it. And when the call ended, the kettle finally screamed. I didn't cry. And people assume mothers cry in moments like that. Tears, trembling hands, some grand show of heartbreak. But grief doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it comes as quiet as a closed door. I walked upstairs and stood in front of the dress. The plastic wrapper crackled softly when I touched it, like it was waking up from a dream it never got to live. I imagined myself in a pew, hands folded, watching him smile at someone who had just become his family. I imagined the moment I would have stood to hug them both. The photo we might have taken, the one I would have placed on my mantle beside all the others. But that world never existed. It was only a small universe I built in my mind and dismantled just as quietly. I took the dress down and laid it on the bed. The room felt different then, like it was holding its breath. There was no anger in me. Just a slow, sinking understanding, like stepping into cold water you didn't know was there. "Yank," I kept thinking about that word she used, special people. I wondered when I stopped being one, or if I ever was in her eyes. And then came the thought I didn't want to face, was my presence inconvenient? Had they planned it this way so nothing, not even obligation, could reach them? A god. I sat at the edge of the bed, my hands resting in my lap. My fingers trembled only once, then went still. I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, not grief, something quieter. Something final, a kind of acceptance that doesn't come from understanding, but from exhaustion. The house felt larger than usual. Every room seemed to echo with a question I wasn't brave enough to ask. That evening, I opened the window just enough to let the cold in. The curtains swayed softly, brushing against my arm like a gentle reminder that the world still moved. Can't. I folded the dress, slow and careful, smoothing out every crease as though preparing it for someone else's hands. Then I placed it back into its cover, tucked it into the back of the closet, and closed the door. The latch clicked softly, a small, final sound. And in the dim light of that room, with the day slipping into blue, I whispered to the empty air, "When did I stop being welcome?" The room didn't answer, but the silence knew. The phone rang in that sharp, impatient way old phones sometimes do, like it already knew it wouldn't bring good news. I was sitting at the kitchen table, peeling an apple in one long, careful ribbon. The house was quiet, except for the slow ticking of the wall clock, a sound that suddenly felt louder as the phone kept ringing. Hey. The peel slipped from my knife and curled on the table like a thin red question. And by the time I picked up, my hands were dry, cool, steady. I didn't expect her voice. And I certainly didn't expect the tone she used, as if I belonged to some obligation I didn't remember agreeing to. There's a stillness the house falls into after betrayal, a sort of soft, dimmed state, as if the walls themselves decide to breathe a little more quietly. After learning they'd married without me, my world didn't fall apart. It simply shifted. Rooms I once filled with hope now felt like they were watching me, waiting for whatever I would do next. I spent those days moving slower, listening more. Not out of sadness, but out of a strange, new clarity, like stepping outside after rain and smelling the earth for the first time in months. I cleaned drawers I hadn't opened in years. I let dishes air dry instead of wiping them. I walked past the dress in the closet and didn't touch it. Everything inside me was settling, the way dust settles in a room. No one visits anymore. But the outside world, their world, kept moving. And when my phone began ringing that morning, cutting through the calm like a blade through cloth, I had a small thought that still surprises me. Whatever this is, I am ready for it. And I didn't know if that was strength or simply a kind of quiet resignation, but it felt steady. It felt earned. Her voice burst through the line the moment I answered, sharp and busy, warp and busy like someone already in the middle of an argument. "Did you transfer it?" she said. No greeting, no pause, just that question, dropped like a stone in still water. I blinked once, staring at the apple peel on the table. For a heartbeat, I wondered if she had the wrong number, the rent, she added, as if clarifying something obvious. "We're past the due date. I thought you handled this already." Can't. Her tone held a strange mix of annoyance and expectation, as though I had inconvenienced her by simply existing outside her plan. I didn't answer immediately. Silence settled around me, warm, patient, almost tender. On her end, the silence turned uncomfortable. "Hello?" she said, a little sharper this time. "Are you there?" I pushed my chair back slow enough to hear the soft scrape of wood against tile. I walked to the window, letting the morning light fall across my hands. Her breathing on the line grew uneven, the way people breathe when they aren't used to waiting. "Oh," she continued, filling the void with words that meant nothing and everything. "Your son said you'd help while things are tight. I assumed this was just something you do, something I do." That line sat strangely in the air, heavy, misplaced, undeserved, and even then, I said nothing. I let the quiet do the work my voice didn't need to do. The moment stretched, thin, fragile, ready to break. I could almost picture her on the other end, pacing, eyebrows drawn tight, irritation rising in small, sharp waves. She didn't say my name. She didn't ask if I was well. She didn't even sound like a woman who had recently become part of my family. No. She spoke like someone speaking down a staircase, expecting whoever listened to climb up to her level. "Look," she finally sighed. Can you just confirm? Yes or no? Did you transfer the rent? Her impatience crackled through the line like static. Yeah, I touched the cool edge of the windowsill, grounding myself in something real, something solid. Outside, a single leaf drifted from the old walnut tree, twirling as it fell, slow, unbothered by the urgency of human voices. When I finally spoke, my tone surprised even me. It was soft, steady, the kind of voice people use when they've stepped out of a burning room and closed the door behind them. And didn't I tell you? I said just that, 5 quiet words. And the kind that don't rush, don't bend, don't explain themselves. Silence from her end. A confused, startled silence. The kind that appears when someone realizes they've miscalculated something important. What? What does that mean? She asked, but I didn't answer. There are some moments that don't need follow-up. Some truths that don't require explanation. I simply let the silence return, calm, cool, final. And then, with a gentle exhale, I hung up. The line went dead with a soft click, one that echoed faintly through the quiet kitchen. I stood there for a long moment, letting the stillness settle again, like dust returning to a shelf after being disturbed. I walked back to the table and picked up the apple peel, feeling its smoothness between my fingers. Outside, the morning had brightened a little, turning the window glass warm to the touch. Didn't I tell you? The phrase drifted through my mind again, not as a question, not as a threat, but as a quiet truth I finally felt strong enough to hold. I set the peel aside, reached for the knife, and began peeling a second apple. My hands didn't shake. Not even once, and for the first time in a long time the house didn't feel empty. It felt certain. The hallway light flickered once before settling, the way old bulbs do when they recognize you. I stood there with my hand on the knob, listening to the soft hum inside my apartment, that gentle nothingness that always greeted me. When I stepped in, the door sighed behind me. The quiet was almost a person, sitting politely in the corner, waiting for me to notice it again. My son once said my home felt empty. But as I slid off my shoes and let the evening settle into my bones, I thought, empty isn't the same as lonely, not to me. The living room looked just the way I'd left it, a thin beam of dusk stretching across the carpet, the small wooden table angled slightly toward the window, the faint smell of dried lavender from a sachet my sister gave me years ago. No toys scattered across the floor, no TV buzzing in the background, no rushed footsteps or overlapping voices tugging at my attention, just stillness, simple, steady stillness. I hung my coat, smoothing the sleeve without thinking. The fabric still felt cool from outside. A small cough of wind tapped the window once, then disappeared. My son's home felt different earlier, loud in a way that wasn't about noise. The kind of loud you hear in people's eyes when they don't look at you long enough. His wife kept adjusting cushions that didn't need adjusting. He kept clearing his throat at nothing. And I kept wondering what had been said about me when I wasn't there. Maybe nothing. Maybe too much. Maybe only the parts they thought they understood. I moved toward the kitchen. My steps echoed more than usual. A reminder that peace has its own voice if you let it speak. On the small dining table, a cardboard box waited like a question I'd been avoiding. It was sealed, but dust had settled along the edges, making a faint outline only time can draw. I remembered packing it years ago, the week after the funeral, when the house felt too full of voices that weren't there anymore. I told myself I'd open it when I was ready. Years passed quietly, and I never claimed readiness. I filled the kettle, the water tapping metal like it was trying to be gentle. When it began its slow boil, I stood beside the counter, fingertips resting on the cool edge. And people think quiet means weak. That simplicity is something fragile, but simple things can hold heavy truths. I've lived long enough to know that. The kettle clicked off. I poured the water over the tea leaves and watched steam rise, curling like memories trying to form a face. Carrying the cup, I sat near the window, where the last strip of orange sky softened the room. My eyes returned to the box. It didn't look threatening, just patient, like it knew I'd come eventually. I broke the seal with an old butter knife. It slipped too easily. Tape dries out when left alone too long. Inside were papers. Fearance. A few envelopes with handwriting I recognized immediately. I lifted the first one. Hey now, A letter addressed to me in my husband's careful script, and the same script he used for grocery lists and anniversary notes, each letter standing straight as if to steady me. I didn't open it, just held it. The air felt heavier, the way it does right before rain. Underneath were property papers, the small plot of land he'd insisted we keep separate, just in your name, he'd said. Kang. Below that, old bank statements, receipts clipped neatly. Tapa guptam bapare. His voice drifted in, low and steady, the way he spoke when he didn't want to scare me, but needed me to hear him. Don't ever let them take advantage of your softness. Softness, people mistake it for surrender, but he knew better. He always said it was a kind of strength not everyone could carry. I set the papers aside and let my fingers rest on the lid of the box. My son, ex-seefers of her du capercha. What had he told his wife? About my finances? About my memory? About the way I choose to live small and quiet because it brings me peace, not because I can't manage more? A floorboard creaked under my feet, though I wasn't moving. Old wood remembers what we try to forget. Night settled slowly, pulling shadows across the room like a blanket someone tucks in with care. My tea had cooled, untouched. The box sat open beside me, patient as ever, its papers breathing in the quiet. Beyond the window, a lone street lamp flickered once and held steady. I watched it glow soft and unwavering. People think silence hides weakness, but sometimes it shelters the truth. I ran my thumb along my husband's sealed letter. There were answers here, maybe more questions too. I wasn't ready to open it. Not yet, but I would, soon. For now, I whispered into the stillness. I wonder what story they've told about me. And the apartment, faithful as always, held my words without letting them fall. The night had grown still enough that I could hear the distant hum of a streetlight outside, holding on against the dark. I sat at the table, the open box beside me, papers spread like thin petals waiting for a hand to notice them. One folder lay untouched, its corner curled slightly upward as if nudging me closer. The lamp above me flickered once, then steadied, casting a soft circle of yellow over everything. I reached for the folder. It felt heavier than it should have, not in weight, but in memory. Perkata. Some things do that when you've avoided them long enough. The pages inside smelled faintly of old envelopes and years folded neatly into themselves. I smoothed the first sheet and felt the paper cool beneath my fingers. It was the account my husband had opened in my name. I remembered signing the forms in that tiny bank office, the fan clicking above us like it was keeping count of our breaths. My son had been there too. Leaning against the desk with that half-grown restlessness boys carry before they learn how to sit still in their own skin. I hadn't checked the account in years. Life has a way of making you put certain things on shelves without realizing you've let them gather dust. Bills came, I paid them, groceries, repairs, little things, but I never touched this account. It was meant to be just in case, my husband had said, and just in case never arrived, or maybe it did in ways I didn't want to see. The apartment's quiet pressed in gently, as if urging me to keep turning the pages. Outside, a car passed slowly, headlights dragging across my wall. The shadows shifted, then settled again. And I took a breath, the kind you don't realize you've been holding until it leaves you a little emptier. The balance stared back at me. Numbers lined neatly in a column, growing quietly year after year, like something tended in secret. It was more than I remembered, far more, enough to soften a life, enough to start over. Enough to make someone look twice. I felt a small, tight pull in my chest. Not excitement, not fear. Something in between. A reminder that money doesn't just carry value, it carries truth. People reveal themselves in the spaces where money sits quietly. My son must have known. He helped open the account. He was the one who insisted we do it that day, saying it was safer, smarter. Use aver masan crosar. He had that determined tilt in his chin, the one he inherited from his father. Maybe he thought I would forget. Maybe he counted on it. Maybe he believed I lived so gently that I wouldn't notice what was mine. A memory flickered, him handing me the pen, eyes tired but kind. But things change, people drift. And kindness can shift shadows when left unexplained. I ran my finger down the list of deposits. The same steady amount, month after month, long after my husband had passed, somebody had been adding to it. Not the bank, not time, someone who knew the password long before I remembered it existed. I leaned back in my chair, letting the truth unspool slowly. My son hadn't distanced himself because he stopped caring. At least not at first. Vistance grows like ivy, quietly, climbing walls you didn't know were there. Why had he stopped visiting? Why did his wife avoid my eyes today? Why the nervous clearing of his throat, the way he held his shoulders like he was balancing a lie he'd grown too tired to carry? Maybe he thought I knew about the money and kept it from him. Maybe he thought I didn't need help, or didn't want it. Maybe he believed I was hiding strength behind softness, strength he didn't understand. Or maybe he had been adding to the account, making sure I was safe from afar, without having to stand in the same room and face the ache between us. But if he was helping me quietly, then why the silence? Why the long months with no phone call, no visit, no simple "Ma, how are you?" The floorboard near the hallway creaked softly, though no one stood there. Old houses do that, speak when you're thinking too loudly. I folded the papers back into the folder, pressing it shut with a gentleness I didn't feel. The weight of it trembled slightly in my hands. Something long ignored had woken up. I placed the folder on the table, its edges aligning with the grain of the wood like it belonged there. The lamp hummed quietly above me, casting my shadow long across the floor. Outside, the streetlight flickered again, steadying itself against the night. I watched it glow soft and determined. Money can explain many things. But it can't answer the one question that sat with me now, breathing in the quiet. Why had my son stepped so far away, if he'd been standing beside me in ways I never saw? I traced the folder's edge with my fingertip, the paper warm now from my touch. Maybe he never left, I whispered to the stillness. And the apartment, loyal as always, held the silence as if it understood more than I did. The morning air felt thin, the kind that brushes against your cheeks without warmth. I walked toward the old municipal, its faded blue paint peeling like it had been holding its breath for years. The steps creaked under my weight, not from age but from memory. I hadn't climbed them since my husband was alive, and back when he still held my elbow gently, guiding me like the world was a little too sharp for me to face alone. Today I climbed alone, the sunlight stretched long behind me as if trying to follow, and I let it. Inside, the building smelled of old paper and cool cement. A dusty fan turned slow circles above the waiting area, stirring the air just enough to keep silence from settling too heavily. I stood at the counter, my hands resting lightly on the wooden edge that had been smoothed by decades of anxious fingers before mine. And the clerk, a woman in her 40s with tired but kind eyes, looked up when I said my name. She blinked twice, recognition softening her expression like rain easing into dry soil. "Oh," she murmured, voice almost respectful, "your husband's surname." I nodded. Something passed between us. Not understanding, not sympathy. More like shared memory of someone neither of us had spoken about in years. "I need updated documents," I said quietly, sliding a list toward her, old property records, anything still active. She studied the papers, then looked at me again, longer this time. "Ian stare for pav kafale, nasta for fadvranta pashter caution." "You know," she said softly, "people have been asking about this land lately." Her words drifted into the room like dust caught in sunlight, not threatening, not alarming. But steady, waiting for me to catch their meaning. I didn't answer immediately. Sometimes silence tells more truth than any sentence can. While she disappeared into the back room, I stood alone at the counter. Maps hung on the walls, faded outlines of roads, rivers, and boundaries that had shifted over time but kept their stories tucked into the lines. I traced a finger lightly over one, feeling the grit of dust cling to my skin. The land my husband bought had been nothing but scrub and silence back then. A place he said would grow into something someday. I never asked what he meant by something. He always spoke in the future tense, like he was writing a letter to a life he wouldn't live long enough to see. When the clerk returned, her arms were full of folders. The papers inside rustled with each step she took, like wind moving through dry leaves. She spread them across the counter, yellowed pages, signatures fading at the edges, official stamps pressed deep into the paper. The sunlight from the high window caught the ink, making it glimmer in places. "Yeah, you'll need to sign here," she said, sliding a pen toward me. "And here, and this one too." My hands were steady as I signed, steadier than I expected. Yuck. Each stroke of my pen felt like resurfacing something I'd buried too long. As she organized the documents, she hesitated, then spoke again. Someone's been asking questions about this land. But they didn't give a name. My breath didn't quicken. It didn't tremble. It simply settled. Yeah. I gathered the papers, tucking them carefully into the folder I'd brought from home. The morning light fell across the counter, tracing the edges of every document like a quiet truth, finally coming forward. The clerk watched me, unsure whether to say more. But some questions drift unspoken, because both people understand the answer is too heavy to hold in daylight. My son knew about this land. He was young when the purchases were made, but not too young to remember. He'd been there on those long drives, the car rattling over dirt roads, my husband talking about soil quality and water lines as though discussing family. So why had he never asked me about any of it? Why, in all his silence and distance, did this never come up? Was he planning something quietly, carefully, without me? The thought didn't stab, it didn't sting. It settled like a soft stone in a pond, sending slow ripples across my chest. Maybe he thought I wasn't paying attention. Maybe he believed age had softened more than just my voice. But standing there in the thin morning light, I realized something simple. He'd forgotten what my husband never did. That softness is not the same thing as blindness. I thanked the clerk. She nodded, eyes lingering on me as though she wanted to say be careful, but settled for take care. Kek fursaf atterpalfrey. Some warnings don't need full sentences. Outside, the sunlight had climbed higher, warming the front steps where cracks spidered beneath my feet. I paused there, folder tucked under my arm, the breeze lifting the edge of my shawl. The street was quiet. A slow truck rumbled in the distance, its engine fading into the wide open morning. I looked down at the papers, proof of things left untouched, unspoken, unasked. The world around me felt strangely lighter, as if the truth had space to breathe now. I hadn't come seeking answers. But I found a question instead, one that slid into my thoughts and settled there, uninvited but certain, If my son was looking into the land, why had he kept me in the dark? The folder pressed warm against my side, like it carried a pulse of its own. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to follow where it led. The hallway smelled faintly of floor polish and yesterday's rain. I had barely stepped through the front gate when I saw her, Mrs. Kamal from next door, standing under the shade of the bougainvillea, its purple petals clinging to her shawl like small secrets. She watched me with that gentle, careful stare old neighbors use when they're not sure whether to speak. The wind rustled through the leaves above us, brushing a quiet whisper against the afternoon. I tightened my grip on the folder in my hand. I hadn't even reached my own stairs yet, and already the day felt heavier than when I'd left the land office. Beta, she called softly, one hand lifting as though she needed permission to continue. A tactile funder fi kamaun and tefte kuk brampapper fine brabreas. Her voice carried the same mixture of concern and restraint she'd used the day my husband died, gentle and want to breaks, like she didn't want anything to break. I walked closer. The concrete beneath my feet was still damp from the morning, small puddles reflecting broken pieces of the sky. I was going to come to you later, she said, but since you're here… She glanced toward my door, the one with the slightly chipped paint, the same door my husband used to complain about but never got around to fixing. There were people here, she said. Earlier today. Something in her tone made the air shift around us, like the building itself had paused to listen. I waited. Not because I was afraid of what she'd say, but because silence often brings out the truth more gently than questions do. Your son, she murmured, and his wife. They came while you were gone. The folder in my hand pressed harder against my side. Not painful. Just present like a reminder of a conversation waiting to happen. They didn't knock, she added after a breath. Just stood there, looking at the door as if expecting something. Her eyes narrowed, not unkindly. Something was off in their faces. I let her words settle, drifting into the small space between us. The leaves above us swayed, scattering sunlight across the wall like trembling pieces of gold. What time? I asked quietly. Maybe an hour after you left, she replied. Not long. She hesitated, her wrinkled hands folding into each other. They didn't say anything to me. They only kept staring at the door, like waiting for it to open. I pictured it. My son, tall and restless. His wife tapping her nails against her phone when she thought no one noticed. Standing before my empty doorway, not knocking, not calling, just looking. What did they do then? Had this left? Left, she said. Just turned around and walked off. Something in her voice suggested she'd watched them longer than she meant to. Old neighbors notice things. The way people stand, the way they shift their weight, the way they avoid speaking. She touched my arm gently. I just thought you should know their expressions. Well, they didn't look like family coming to visit. I nodded. I thanked her. And even though she waited for more, perhaps an explanation, perhaps a reassurance, I offered none. Yank. Some stories aren't ready to be spoken aloud by the time they're discovered. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking as though remembering old footsteps. Shadows stretched across the narrow corridor, softened by the muted afternoon light slipping in through the small window at the end. My door looked the same as always, plain, familiar, slightly weathered. But now I imagined two faces in front of it, searching for something they weren't brave enough to ask for directly. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The apartment welcomed me the same way it always did, a soft echo of quiet, the faint scent of tea leaves, the curtain lifting gently by the open window. Why had they come, and why only when they knew I wouldn't be home? Inside, I placed the folder on the table, its contents still warm from the sunlight outside. The edges of the documents pressed outward slightly, as though eager to break free of their envelope. Maybe they thought I didn't know what was mine. Maybe they assumed I'd grown too soft to notice footsteps behind my back. But softness is often mistaken for emptiness, and stillness for weakness. I traced the rim of the teacup left on the counter from the morning. The ceramic felt cool, grounding, a small reminder that not every truth needs to be announced to be understood. Had they expected answers from a locked door? Or had they come hoping my absence would give them permission for something else? As the kettle began its low hum, I walked to the window overlooking the courtyard. The bougainvillea petals formed a scattered ring around the place where I'd stood with my neighbor. The world outside moved slowly. A child on a bicycle, a cat stretching in the sun, a distant bus rumbling past. Normal, unbothered, unaware of the questions rising quietly inside my small apartment. I thought of their faces as described, not seen. Expectant, strained, not quite guilt, but something adjacent to it. Why come only when the door would stay closed? And what had they hoped to find behind it? The kettle clicked off. The silence that followed was deeper than before. Somewhere inside it a truth waited, patient, unhurried. And I knew the time was coming when I'd have to open the door. Not for them, but for whatever stood behind their silence. You cat? The mail slid through the door with a soft thud, the kind that barely disturbs a quiet room, but still manages to echo in your chest. I was boiling lentils, listening to the small clicking sound the pot made before it settled into a simmer. The day had been slow, wrapped in a kind of hush that felt almost respectful. I wiped my hands on a towel, walked to the door, and picked up the single envelope lying on the rug. My son's handwriting sharp, familiar, like a knock that never came. Inside the house, even the walls seemed to hold their breath. Sir, I carried the envelope to the table the way you hold something that isn't heavy, but still manages to weigh on you. The sun was falling through the kitchen window in those narrow evening stripes, turning the dust in the air into gold. It made the envelope glow a little, like it had something important to say. I sat down slowly, letting the chair creak beneath me. That old chair knows more secrets than I do. For a moment, I just traced my finger along the edge of the envelope. His handwriting was the same as when he was 10, careful, concentrated, trying too hard to be grown. He used to press his pencil so firmly the paper would tear. I wondered if he wrote this one in a hurry or if he sat with it, the way a person sits with a thought they don't want to finish. And a letter can hold a world inside its soft paper, hard truths, or so I told myself. I broke the seal gently, like something inside might bruise if I hurried. The flap lifted, the light shifted, and then the truth lay there in my hands. Nothing, not a word. Just an empty envelope tucked inside another one, silent and hollow, like a room someone walked out of too quickly. For a long moment, I simply stared. I held it up to the light, the paper turning almost translucent. Sometimes, if you look hard enough, meaning hides between the fibers. I tilted it, turned it, even brought it close to my ear, as though silence might whisper something if I gave it a little time. But it didn't. The kettle clicked off in the background, but I didn't move. The envelope felt fragile, but the message, whatever it was, felt sharp. Why send something empty? Why send anything at all? The kitchen clock ticked again, louder now. I placed the envelope against the window pane. The late sun glowed through it, revealing nothing except the faint outline of its own folds. No hidden writing. No forgotten slip of paper. No accidental omission. It was intentional. Emptiness chosen, not made. I thought of him standing somewhere, addressing this envelope with my name. Did his hand hesitate? Orphan Heaventats. Did he think of what he wasn't writing? Or did the silence feel easier than any words he could have offered? There had been a time when he brought me stones from the playground, small, misshapen, but offered with love. This felt like the opposite of that, a gift turned inside out. I set the envelope on the table and smoothed it with my palm. The paper was warm from my fingers. I felt colder. I leaned back in my chair and let the quiet settle over me, soft and steady. There's a moment after confusion where your heart begins stitching together its own explanation, even if it's wrong. And in that moment, you understand more than you want to. Maybe this was meant to guilt me, an invitation to feel the emptiness he thinks I created. Or maybe it was a reminder of something he believes I never gave, some promise I don't remember making, canned, or a love that didn't show itself in the way he needed. But then again, maybe he didn't know what to say either. Silence has a way of becoming its own language in families. I picked up the envelope again, running my thumb over the blank interior. It felt like he was handing me a space to fill, and I didn't want to. Not anymore. I had spent too many years trying to guess what lived behind his pauses, behind the way he looked at me without quite meeting my eyes. A mother shouldn't have to decode her own child. I folded the envelope back into its shell and placed it on the table. Not gently, not harshly, just honestly. No, I wouldn't respond, not this time. If he wanted to speak, truly speak, he would. And if he didn't, well, silence carries its own answers. Evening settled over the house like a slow blanket, pressing softly against the windows. I stood there, watching the envelope on the table, its edges glowing faintly in the fading light. The room felt larger now, as though the empty paper had taken something with it when I set it down. Or maybe it had simply revealed something I'd been trying not to see. I turned off the kitchen light and let the dusk take over. In the half-dark, the envelope looked like a small door left slightly open. A door he could walk through, if he ever chose to, or chose to. I left it there and walked away, listening to the quiet follow me down the hall, gentle and honest, in a way his letter wasn't. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel like mine to fill. The grocery store was quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that comes when rain is waiting just beyond the clouds. The fluorescent lights hummed above me, steady and tired, as I pushed my cart down the aisle lined with canned soups. I wasn't shopping for much, just tea, lentils, a small bag of rice. Still, I moved slowly, letting the soft wheels guide me. That's when I heard it. Two voices. Low. Close. Kera? They weren't speaking to me. But something in the tone, sharp then softened, made my hands still on the cart. Sometimes the truth arrives in places you don't expect, and sometimes it's spoken by people who don't even know you're listening. I had just reached for a box of tea when I caught the first name, not mine, but hers. Kiao, my daughter-in-law. It floated between the shelves like a loose thread. I didn't look up, didn't turn. I only kept my eyes on the small print of the tea box, letting the words behind me settle into my ears the way dust settles on furniture. Quiet, inevitable, impossible to ignore. One of the women spoke fast, like she was afraid the thoughts might escape her mouth before she shaped them. The other listened with that careful hum people make when they already know the gossip but want to hear it again. They mentioned borrowed money, relatives, neighbors, promises that dissolved into air, debits that grew legs and chased after her. And I placed the tea gently in my cart, watching my own hand tremble just a little. I pretended to study the shelves, letting their voices weave in and out of the quiet aisle. Funny how you can live with a question for months, maybe years, and then suddenly, strangers start answering it for you, not kindly, not cruelly, just carelessly, like they were discussing a weather pattern that had passed through town. I moved my cart forward, turning down the next aisle as though their words had simply slid past me. But I stayed close enough to hear the rest. She borrowed from me last winter, one of the women said. Said she'd return it in 2 weeks. I'm still waiting, her friend sighed. And her cousin said she vanished for months, didn't pick calls, didn't return a thing. A soft, unbelieving laugh followed. She hides behind that sweet voice, but people are tired. I grip the cart handle, the cool metal grounding me. And pieces inside me, old worries, half-formed doubts, strange silences, began to fit together with slow, quiet clicks. Okay, so that was it, the restlessness in my son, the rushed wedding. The way he avoided talking about finances, brushing off every question with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I pushed the cart toward the bread section, pretending I needed something there. My reflection in the freezer door looked older under the store's harsh lights, older and suddenly aware. Behind me, the women kept talking, their voices fading just enough to feel like echoes. Her husband must be drowning, one said. We all know whose money she's using. A pause, a sigh. Poor boy. Poor boy, my boy. The bread crinkled softly as I picked up a loaf, but my hands felt far away from me. I stood still for a long moment, staring at nothing in particular, just the quiet reflection of a woman holding too many unspoken questions. I thought about the envelope he had sent me, empty, heavy in its own way. I thought about the strange visit to my door, the way they didn't knock, the neighbors' worried eyes. And then I thought of my daughter-in-law's smile on the wedding day, bright but trembling underneath. A smile that flickered too quickly, like a light bulb about to go out. Maybe it hadn't been love holding things together. Maybe it had been pressure, dipped, fear of being found out. I placed the bread gently in my cart, the plastic whispering beneath my fingers. Some truths arrived softly, almost politely. This one did not. It hit me with the quiet force of realization, the kind that doesn't break you, but changes the shape of the room around you. Haufer and honor estas, de Pershen and Ukekali. My son wasn't distant out of coldness. He wasn't lost out of pride. He was tangled in something heavier than he knew how to carry, and maybe he didn't know how to ask for help. I took a slow breath, letting the air settle deep inside my chest. Not panic, not anger, just understanding. A kind that felt older than the walls around me. At the checkout counter, I placed the items one by one onto the belt. The cashier smiled politely, but her voice blurred into the soft hum of the store. Outside, the sky had finally decided to rain, fine, steady droplets, like someone shaking out a long, wet memory. I stood under the awning, holding the grocery bag against my hip. The conversations, the silences, the empty envelope, all of it settled into place, like a puzzle whose last piece had finally been found. Some truths find you when you're not looking. I looked out at the rain, thin and shimmering. Some truths find you when you're not looking. And some come through strangers' mouths, and some slip quietly into your heart and stay there, waiting for whatever comes next. Evening light was slipping through the curtains when I heard the knock. Not urgent, not gentle, just unsure. I was folding a small stack of hand towels, still warm from the dryer. The house felt soft, resting. The kind of quiet that makes you think twice before disturbing it. The second knock came, quicker this time. A hesitation wrapped in wood and echo. I knew before I opened the door, a mother always knows. My son stood there with the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. And the hallway behind him hummed with old bulbs and the faint smell of someone's dinner. And just like that, the calm slipped away. He stepped inside before I could finish saying hello. Not rudely, just in a way that told me he had been pacing somewhere, rehearsing words he wasn't ready to say. His shoes clicked against the floor, quick, restless, like he was trying to find steady ground. He glanced at the walls first, then the shelf, then the small table where I kept a bowl of fruit. His eyes moved fast, hungry for something I didn't keep here, something he assumed I did. Akurchava dapa plasatwada, you've changed things, he said, though I hadn't. Not really. The same chairs. The same faded rug that still curled at one corner, the same quiet. I watched him wander to the window and peek through the curtain, as if money could hide in sunbeams or in the folds of old fabric. He kept talking, light words with heavy breaths. Traffic was bad, his day was long, he hadn't slept well. But under all of it was something else, a pressure pushing the air between us into a colder shape. I stood near the armchair, hands together, letting him circle the room, like a man searching for a door he wasn't sure he wanted to open. He finally sat, but only on the edge of the sofa, like he didn't plan to stay long, or maybe feared sinking too deeply into anything that felt safe. "Oh, Cat, did you, He started, rubbing his palms against his jeans. "Did you get the thing I sent?" His voice cracked right at the end of the sentence, just enough for a mother to notice. "The rent request," he added when I didn't answer fast. "I did." "Ah." My voice sounded steady even to my own ears, though something tugged quietly inside me. He nodded too quickly, too many times, as if rehearsing relief. "Good," he said. "Good. We just, We're just in a tight spot right now. You know how it is. Things are expensive. Life is expensive." His eyes were darting again to the bookshelf, the kitchen doorway, my hands. I wondered what he was looking for. Gold? Hidden envelopes? Stacks of secret money his imagination had built into my small rooms? Yeah. He leaned back a little, then forward again, restless, tangled in his own silence. "We've been managing," he said. "But it's been hard. For both of us, meaning him and his wife." I only nodded, letting the weight of his words settle without trying to catch them. The air tightened between us, like the room had exhaled and forgotten how to breathe again. He looked at me then, really looked. Content, but not in the way a son looks at a mother. It was the way someone looks at a locked drawer they're afraid to open. You know," he said softly, "if you ever needed help, you could tell me." I held his gaze. "I know." A pause, a long one. "Odd," he swallowed, eyes dipping away from me, landing on the plant by the window, its leaves a little wilted from forgetting to water it yesterday. "Huptige faturfen tots of fain tapakov, ter tum sai spagatas." "There were stories," he murmured. "People talk. They say you're doing better than you let on, that you got. Things, what a small, heavy word. I have what I need," I said. His jaw tightened, not in anger, in disappointment. Like he had hoped for a different answer, one that would open a door for him to walk through. "We're struggling," he repeated, quieter now, a confession, a plea wrapped in pride he couldn't let go of. I waited for the real question, the one sitting behind his eyes, but he didn't say it, couldn't, and I didn't help him by asking. He stood after a while, brushing invisible dust from his shirt. The kind of gesture people make when they feel unfinished. At the door, he hesitated. Just a breath. Just long enough for me to wonder if he'd turn back and say what he came to say. But he didn't, "Take care," he said, voice thin. "You too," I replied. When the door closed, the lock clicked softly, a sound that felt too much like a heartbeat. The quiet returned, thick and familiar. I sat on the edge of the sofa where he had been, the cushion still warm. In the silence, a question lingered beside me, gentle, persistent. Why couldn't he ask for what he truly wanted? And why? Why did he think I needed to hide anything from him at all? The morning light came in thin, pale lines, the kind that barely touched the floor, as if the sun itself was hesitant. I sat at the table with a cup of tea cooling between my palms. As steam rose in slow circles, dissolving before it reached my face. The apartment was silent except for the distant hum of traffic and the soft, uneven breath of someone who didn't want to be there. My son sat across from me, hands restless, eyes lowered. It felt like we were both waiting for a truth that had been circling the room for years, and finally decided to land. He had come early, too early for casual conversation, still wearing last night's expression, still carrying the heaviness he tried to hide the evening before. The chair creaked when he shifted, its old wood bending the way people bend when they're tired of pretending. I watched his fingers drum softly on the table, at a nervous rhythm that reminded me of when he was a boy, and tapped on everything just to fill silence, and tapped on everything just to fill silence. He didn't tap for fun anymore. He tapped to steady himself. I could tell he thought today would be a continuation of yesterday, another chance to circle the same unspoken request. Another attempt to hint at what he wanted, without ever having to say the words aloud. But something inside me had settled overnight, something firm but not cold, like a knot that finally untangled enough to let the truth breathe. The tea had gone warm. He hadn't touched his. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked once and then stopped, as if it knew better than to interrupt. I folded my hands, letting my fingers rest. There were no more errands to run from this conversation. "It was time, I know," I said quietly. He looked up, startled, like a child caught with something fragile in his hands. "No what?" he asked, but the question came too fast, coat too thin to be real. The old account, I murmured. The land. The inquiries. Everything. The last word hung between us like a soft echo. Not accusing, just true. His face drained, all the color falling out of it, as if someone had wiped him clean. He sat straighter, not out of confidence, but out of the instinct to brace for something. I thought. He began, then stopped. His throat worked, trying to swallow a thought he couldn't shape into sound. I let the quiet sit with us. Quiet has a way of making truth visible. I've seen the signatures, I continued, the dates, the questions being asked in my name. His eyes darted to the window, then the floor, like he hoped an escape route might appear, between the tiles. I didn't want to worry you, he whispered. That line, the soft lie people use to wrap their intentions in something that feels like care. Okay. I didn't answer it. I didn't need to. I've secured everything, I said, my accounts. The land your father bought. The documents that were left open too long. His breath caught. Barely a sound, but I heard it. You moved them? Yeah, his voice trembled around the edges. Yes, and the access? Closed. He blinked, the confusion and fear mixing in his eyes. Like two shades of a truth he never wanted me to know. He wasn't used to me speaking so plainly, not about this. Not about anything that touched the borders of money and trust. I only did what I should have done years ago, I said, not sharp, just steady. He leaned back slowly, as if the chair behind him wasn't solid anymore. Why now? He asked. I looked at him, really looked, at the lines beside his mouth, catched not by age, but by choices. At the tension in his shoulders, the kind men carry when they've spent too long living inside someone else's expectations. Then I asked the question that had been sitting in the quiet corners of my heart for far longer than he realized. When, I said gently, did you stop seeing me as your mother and start seeing me as a resource? The air stilled. Even the traffic outside seemed to pause. He didn't answer. He couldn't. And maybe he didn't need to, because silence sometimes, is the clearest confession a person can give. He stared at the table as if the wood grain held a way out, a small path he could follow back to who he used to be. I didn't push him. A mother's heart learns the shape of disappointment, long before she ever speaks of it. When he finally stood, his chair scratched softly across the floor. He opened his mouth once, to apologize, to explain, to rewrite the moment, but no words came. He only nodded barely, a note, and let himself out. The door clicked shut, a gentle sound that felt heavier than any argument. I sat alone in the quiet kit, hands resting around a cup gone cold, and wondered, when love changes shape, does it ever return to the way it once was? The winter sun came low, stretching long shadows across the floorboards. Dust motes floated like tiny ghosts in the quiet light. The phone rang, sharp and sudden, cutting through the slow rhythm of the afternoon. I let it ring twice before picking it up, as if letting the sound linger might give me time to measure my patience. Her voice, bright and too quick, filled the line, cheerful, familiar, yet somehow not meant for me. She asked again, about rent, as though my life existed solely to fund hers. I didn't answer right away. I just listened, holding the silence like a small shield. The apartment was still. Even the radiator's soft hiss seemed to pause in expectation. I set the kettle on, not for tea, but for the ritual of presence, hands busy while the mind wandered. The dress hung in the corner, still pressed and wrapped in plastic. A reminder of a day I was never part of. Its satin shimmer caught the weak sunlight, and I noticed how it seemed to breathe in the quiet room. I thought of her voice over the phone last week, demanding, entitled, assuming, of my son's visits. I know, restless and hesitant. The way his eyes searched for something he feared I would keep from him. I realized then that nothing I had done was hidden. All my choices, my care, my quiet management of life's small accounts and papers, had existed as truths he never expected me to touch. And perhaps she, too, had assumed the same. I folded the tea towel neatly, watching the steam curl up and vanish. And felt the calm that comes from knowing from usual measure of a thing, even if it has taken years to understand. Her voice came through again, bright and rapid, asking for the rent as if it were a routine matter. and I finally let myself speak. Catafesta. I don't fund strangers, I said. Simple, flat, neither loud nor sharp. K. There was a sputter of confusion on the other end, in a catch of air, a momentary hesitation that made her words tumble into silence. I didn't clarify, I didn't apologize. The room seemed to hold its breath. And outside, a crow cawed once. I know then flew off, leaving only the whisper of winter wind. I hung up. Ka. The line went dead, but the quiet remained, soft, uninterrupted, no anger, no triumph. Just a certainty that had taken months to build. I moved to the window, letting the sunlight slide along the floor. Ka! Warming the wooden planks where the dress lay folded in the corner. The fabric caught the light, its sheen subdued in the gentle winter glow. I traced its outline with my eyes, remembering the hope it once held, a hope that wasn't mine to share with them. I picked up the dress carefully, feeling the smooth satin under my fingers. The plastic had kept it perfect, but it no longer seemed like a symbol of loss. It was merely cloth now, folded neatly, waiting for no one. I thought of the calls, the letters, the visits that came filled with expectation and assumption. How easily people forget the measure of another's life. How easily they assume silence is submission. Ken? I set the dress aside in the drawer, folded with deliberate care, and realized that my freedom was not loud or public. It didn't need to be. It existed quietly in the absence of obligation. Knis in the stillness of choice, la persal. Kindle in the stillness of choice kept wholly for myself. The phone remained on the table, untouched, as if even it could sense that its role in this story had ended. I let the room breathe, in letting the sunlight slide across the floorboards, highlighting dust and warmth alike. The freedom felt gentle, almost imperceptible. But it was absolute. Neither vengeance nor victory, simply the quiet reclamation of what had always belonged to me. I stood by the window, letting the winter light warm my shoulders. The apartment was empty in the way a home becomes empty when nothing is owed to anyone. I folded the last corner of the dress and tucked it into the drawer. No more waiting, no more calls. A crow passed outside, its shadow sliding over the floor like a reminder that life moves quietly forward. I didn't feel pride, I didn't feel anger, I only felt free. And as I set the kettle back on the stove, ready for another cup of tea, I wondered, quietly, had they realized what they tried to use was never truly theirs to take? And if not, would it matter? The sunlight lingered, the room held its breath, and I let myself finally do the same.